Hello, and welcome back to the final day of the Steel Success Strategies Industry Briefing 2021. Without any further ado, I will hand over to my colleague, Rojita Debera, price reporter at Fast Markets, to introduce our first speaker and our first keynote of the day. Over to you, Rojita.
Thanks, Alex. And welcome, everybody. This is the last day of Steel Success Strategies. And I am really excited to be talking to our next guest. This is Mr. Saeed Gumran Al Remeithi. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Emirates Steel. And I believe this is the first time we are speaking to him at SSS. Mr. Al-Remeithi is also the Economic Committee of World Steel. So he has a very good overview of the Gulf steel sector, and because he's right at the center of it all, I am looking forward to hearing from him how the last year has been, with the impact of COVID's impact on overall business, the oil business. And I believe he also has a presentation for us regarding Emirates Steel. So welcome, Mr. Saeed.
Thank you, Rojita, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I'm really glad to be here today. It's been a while since last time I attended this conference in New York, and I'm sure we all miss the great city and meeting in person. But I'm glad that I'm here today and taking part of this great event. In my short presentation today, I will share with you a specific view of the global steel industry structure and the challenges that are currently facing the GCC steel industry in particular. And at the end, we'll have the measures that we took at Emirates Steel to cope with the situation. So if we can start the presentation, next slide, please. I'm sure many of you have seen this graph, which shows that the global steel production went through many changes over the last 50 years. In particular, two major shifts have taken place. First, the output increase, of course, and steel making hubs have shifted between countries. Such big shifts were the result of many factors combined. Demographic factors related to urbanization, changes in the strategic industrial policies, and macroeconomic changes. In general, growth of steel production in any country reflects its local development needs for urban development, infrastructure construction, and industrialization. I will be elaborating more in the coming slides. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, and in this slide, we can see that steel production and consumption in developed countries have been reasonably steady for the last 30 years. However, the story is different when analyzing steel production and consumption in developing countries who have been witnessing a growth trend for almost 20 years now. As I indicated in the previous slide, such growth reflects the local development needs of these countries, especially for urban development and infrastructure construction. Now, one question that forces itself in the graph is, given the relatively high steel production and consumption in the developing countries at present, what do you think? Is it reasonable to expect a decrease in these figures in the coming years? Do we expect another shift? Next, please. Now I will try to show some figures that support the changes that are taking place in the steel market globally over the last 3 decades. If we start with the demographic factors, as shown on the left side graph, we can see the developing countries are seeing bright urbanization prospects, leading to a big shift in commodity steel production. unlike developed countries with mature steel markets. If we look at the industrial development, we will see in the right side chart that mechanical engineering had grown largely in the developed world, causing the move towards higher value added steel products like engineering steels and ultra high strength steels for the automotive industry. Now, one driver for steel production shifts is the efficiency factor. As you can see in the middle chart, the developed countries had shifted part of their manufacturing base to low-cost countries, providing competitive raw materials, labor, and power costs. And if we look at the lower bar chart in the middle, we can see that labor cost in Germany in 2015, for example, was 15 times more expensive than labor costs in China. We can see that the growth rate in domestic motor vehicles production between 1990 and 2019 reached over 1,200% in China and 500% in India, compared to 50% in Japan and 26% in Germany. It is then the nature of the steel markets to keep on changing, to adapt with the new needs, respond to new shocks, and accommodate new developments. It is also reasonable to expect in the next 5 to 15 years, the steel production hubs to shift again, considering the drive towards cleaner environment via electrical arc furnace steel making and to meet infrastructure requirements. I think a good example here is the US. With the huge stimulus injected, we can see, because we can only expect steel use per capita to rise again to meet rising demand in the short term. Huge electrical arc furnace capacity additions will come on stream. I think likewise will happen in India. If we can go to the next slide, please. Here, examining the steel maturity curve of any country is a valuable tool, I think. As countries develop, their steel consumption per capita increases to a peak point, then it starts to decline before finally stabilizing. This is valid when considered against time or against GDP per capita. For example, in the period between 1991 and 2008, the GCC countries witnessed massive real estate and infrastructure development projects, as well as oil and gas facilities. At its peak in 2008, the UAE consumed almost 2,500 kg per capita, while Qatar consumed around 1,800 kg. By 2010, consumption in the UAE and Qatar had dropped actually to around 1,400 kg per capita. This year, in the UAE, we expect to consume around 770 kg per capita only. Compared to developed countries, it is reasonable to expect that demand for long steel products in the GCC, steadily moving to maturity. But on the right side, I would say steel consumption in the GCC region could soon open up in manufacturing and engineering, as well as the downstream industries. Next, please. In this slide, we can see some of the potential challenges for the steel industry at present. The first challenge, I think, is the changing demand, as the requirements of our clients are always evolving, of course. Quarterly improvement are expected to be more frequent. Demand for new steel grades like magnetic steels and grain-oriented electrical metal sheets is also expected to grow. Another challenge is the higher trade barriers causing high economic costs and potentially disrupting downstream industry. No doubt, digital transformation, big data, machine learning, and AI are becoming the key to operational improvements and enhanced efficiency. Of course, this may become a challenge for some companies. Higher overcapacity is obviously is high risk to the industry. Volatile feedstock costs could, coupled with the supply tightness for quality ores and scrap, regional growth disparity with different growth rates from one region to another, whereby high growth countries can flood other markets. And of course, we know that CO2 emissions from the steel industry is a challenge, and we need to develop alternative routes to produce green steel. Last, of course, the COVID pandemic had made the problems faced by the world economies even worse. Next, please. Now, if we talk about the GCC specifically, I believe we face some fundamental challenges in the region. I just listed 5 here, and I'll be explaining more about each one in the subsequent slides. Next, please. There are export tariff barriers that face the GCC steel producers across the world. These include safeguard and anti-dumping duties. With trade protection across most countries of the world, GCC producers have limited export options, actually. In addition, the GCC countries do not have a unified quality standard. Almost each country use a different standard, and you can even see more of even one or more of 2 standards within a country. This gives easy access for spot importer to dump surplus material in these, I would say, unprotected markets. And I think that the solution to these issues is for the GCC countries to have unified standard, of course, mandatory certification requirements, and import quotas, just like others, to regulate the supply of steel products from various origins. Next, please. As you know, there is a high dependence in the GCC countries on government spending, which is driven by oil prices as well as regional geopolitical issues. At the same time, I believe that the steel industry can do its part. First, by driving its business towards efficiency, for example. This is achieved by improving, of course, its supply chain processes, reducing operation costs, and improving customer service. At Emirates Steel, for example, we have embarked since the beginning of 2020 on a 5-year program to transform the efficiency of all our business functions and improve our commercial competitiveness. Second, I think by working with GCC governments to encourage private sector investments, which is important. The GCC states have begun to embrace the private sector role in their economies. In doing so, they might avoid big capital expenditures across utilities, airports, healthcare, and education. In that light, GCC countries may support growth-oriented sectors that are not dependent on revenues from oil. They can facilitate and encourage the ease of doing business in general. Next, please. the important fact, I think, is that the GCC steel industry is mostly based on the direct reduction iron and electrical arc furnace route, with substantial dependence on DR grade material. As a result, the increase in IOP prices made it essential for us to find alternative feed materials. So I believe that the flexibility between charging pellets or scrap is a key to secure a competitive raw material prices. And I can see that more of the producers would try to have this flexibility, whether in the existing plants or in the new ones to be built. Next, please. Now I'll move to the fourth challenge, which I believe is one of the biggest fundamental challenge that the GCC producers are facing, which is the high dependence on the construction sector. The big drop in construction in GCC translated to less rebar consumption, which dropped by 26% in 2020 compared to 2015. In order to mitigate this risk, in my opinion, it's necessary to diversify steel production into flat products, manufacturing, and engineering. This direction is expected to pick up momentum in the coming years, with a resulting shift in steel production in the region. Next, please. Here, so as you know, the global iron and steel industry accounts for approximately 7 to 9% of total global CO2 emissions. Recently, also USA, Europe, and China committed to become carbon neutral by 2050. So this is a challenge for the global steel industry, including the GCC, of course, to develop and implement the needed technologies to achieve this target. However, the steel producers in the region are very much with many initiatives, like Emirates Steel CO2 capturing project with Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, which has successfully sequestrated more than 1.2 million tons of CO2 since it started in 2017. This is equivalent to taking out more than 250,000 cars out of the street, or planting 150,000 trees. Next, please. So this will be my my last slide. I think when it comes to the future, I believe hydrogen is on the agenda. Establishing or switching to hydrogen-based steel production in the GCC can be implemented either in existing facilities or in the future sites. Several hydrogen production projects have been announced in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and in Oman, on which I believe as steel producers can leverage in the future. That will be it from my side. Thank you for listening. I would like this time to thank Fast Markets for organizing this great events, and I'll be happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. That was a very interesting presentation, and I think it's very good to have another perspective. You know, I'm from India, and I work in US, but I always keep an eye on what's going on in the other parts of the world. And I think it's the first time I'm seeing, like, you know, a good big breakdown of the Gulf region as well. You know, Emirates Steel, maybe if you could give a short, history, about Emirates Steel, because I saw a very interesting description that it went from a re-roller to becoming a fully integrated steel producer. So, you know, if you could say a few lines about that.
Okay, sure. You might know that Mert Steel is a state-owned company. It's owned by the government of Abu Dhabi. Actually, the company has established back in 1998. Our first production was in 2000. By the way, I joined the company in 2002, so it's it was brand new. I joined as a production engineer at that time. But the company was relatively small at that time. It was only a rolling mill um, that capacity of 500,000 tons of rebar yearly. Um, the main I think the targets of the government of establishing such a company was of course to diversify the economy away from oil. This is on top of the agenda of the government by establishing and by embracing and by improving the industry overall. And the metal industry is one of it, and it comes actually along with the agenda where the company was the infrastructure, the construction overall was booming, and we needed such a material for the local, but also for the GCC market. And also that I think the other reason where for establishing such a company is also to create jobs for UAE nationals. We have come across two major expansions in 2006 and in 2008, where we have increase our capacity to reach 3.5 million tons of finishing steels. We produce four main products: rebar, wire rod, heavy sections, and then sheet piles.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the one question that I typically am asking everyone this year, even last year, was what was the immediate impact of COVID for your company's operations, for demand coming from your customers, which as you say, it's typically been construction heavy, but trying to diversify into other sectors as well. What was the initial impact, and how is it now, one year later? As you say, the Gulf countries are in a much better state, vaccination wise, the overall economic health of the region as well. If you could just say something about that.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I think we can take this in two parts, the human parts and the business part out of the COVID. No doubt, of course, COVID impact was a huge over not only I think the steel industry, but overall in our life by all means. From the humanity point of view, I think from my side, or let us say from the company side, our priority was to really the safety of our people, and to really protect them from that. I think when the pandemic came, we were all learning. It was very tough time at that time, but I can tell you successfully we were, alhamdulillah, very successful, because our priority was to really protect our people. So there were so many things was done in this front, but I would say number one help was coming from the governments, as government of UAE, which is I really appreciate. I think the government is doing fantastic. They've been doing fantastically good in this front. So this was our priority, to really protect people, and I can tell you we had very small rate until today, alhamdulillah, within the company, whether our employees to in terms of cases. That's number one. So we kept our operation ongoing. We did not have any interruption in terms of COVID being hit. And I can tell you today, alhamdulillah, I think UAE is quickly coming back to normal. From the business point of view, of course, there was, as I mentioned, there was a drop in the demand because of COVID. If we talk about the rebar, a few years back, I think the consumption was more than 3 million. tons here at least in UAE. Today we see it's like less than 2 million tons of the demand. And we see a recovery now in terms of going a little bit up. We're not really back to 2019, for example, but it slowly is coming up. I think economically, the country is again is open up. Alhamdulillah, we are doing good. I think the vaccination, the action that the government has taken in UAE, I think resulted in a really good position today. I just read actually earlier today in The Economist that UAE, we are having actually 99% of our population being vaccinated in dose number 1, and around 62% in the dose number 2, and we are the number 1 as in the whole world in terms of number of vaccination per capita. And the business is, if you go to Dubai today, the business is almost normal. We're open up, and we're just looking forward to really come out from this COVID issue.
Okay, that leads me into the next question I had, which you've already touched on, in your presentation. You said this was the biggest challenge facing GCC steelmakers, the move away from construction. So if construction, I understand, is the major bulk of your demand. So what, you mentioned manufacturing and, downstream products. Could you give a few examples of what are these downstream, sectors that is beginning to open up, or has already, become meaningful?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, I think just like as I said in the presentation, we are maturing towards the construction. I mean, don't get me wrong. The construction and the longs products will be always there, and will be always needed in the market. That doesn't mean we will go to zero, but it's maturing. As I mentioned, we came down from more than 2,500 per capita to around 770 today. That's tell us that we need to also come out from this situation by just diversifying the products that the steel that we can produce. And in this case, the flats and engineering, and so I'm expecting a shift for sure for that, and that's actually in line, for example, with the hot rolled coil project that we are embarking now. That's actually aligned with the strategy for us to diversify our products, but also it's in line with the governments and the regions' intention to really support the downstream and support the downstream overall initiative. Here in Abu Dhabi, in UAE, there's a big initiatives to really to establish more than 13,000 SIMIs and downstreams overall in all industries in the next 10 years. I think that comes along with our strategy. So simply we need to diversify away from the construction and build up the ecosystem to really diversify towards more products.
What is that HRC project you just mentioned? Is that something? I don't know about that.
Yeah, we announced this. Recently. We are in the process to actually put up our flat mill. Inshallah, this is we are in the position today where we believe in 2 years down the road we'll have our plants up and running, inshallah.
Okay, good to know that. Okay, I think the next area I would like to speak about is you said the volatility of feedstock prices and looking towards alternatives, moving away from DRIs. And there were some examples given in your presentation. So scrap is a very interesting topic always, from like whichever part of the sector we look at. So yeah, what are these alternatives you're looking at? And,
It's,
uh,
it's either, I mean, what I mentioned there is the flexibility actually. Like, I mean, of course, we will be, we are DRI route, like, companies. So, like, DRI and I mean, pellets or IOP is essential for us. All what I'm trying to say is like, we need to be agile and flexible where like, our plants can really not to only depends on like DR grades material or pellets, where we can also like have the steel making to take both direct reduction iron and also scrap. Like for that will like mitigate the risk of being like having only one material, and this is also again in our strategy where like to once we are in our hot roll coil project, we are also introducing another steel making plant where we will have it based on scrap, where like we can really adjust and diversify also our material balance. We have a little bit of balance where we can charge more scrap. The challenge here actually in the region, or at least in UAE, the scrap is, and it was also in the presentation, if you notice, the scrap we do have scrap in the country, but it's been exported outside, and the challenge is now to really keep it within the country and use it. Of course, today we charge scrap in the facilities, but it's in a small percentage comparing, I mean, it's only up to 10 to 15, 20% maximum that we can charge scrap in our facilities.
Okay. Saeed, I'm seeing some questions coming from the audience. So can I go ahead and ask you those?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is a question from Prakash Tatia from India. Um, how is Emirates Steel addressing high-priced DR grade pellets? If you're consuming more of a scrap, any possibility of UAE government to impose restrictions on export of scrap, as was done earlier? That's what you were saying.
Yeah, of course. So we are working closely with the to really have the scrap within the country. We once it makes sense, we charge the scrap, of course, like based on our calculation where it's like the balance is there. The issue here with the direct reduction plants, if you charge more scrap and you slow down the production. Because our facility is like had DRI goes all the way to this steel making. So there's like there's a breaking point where we can actually charge more scrap where like today the operations. And this is where I said like once our steel making plant 4 comes in stream, then we'll have like a more balance of scrap charging to really mitigate such an issue. But from again focusing on what we have in our hands is like to really have an efficiency in our process, we just focus on things where we can reduce our costs all the time and have an efficient operation to reduce our cost.
Okay, thank you. The next question, it's a bit specific, so I don't know if you would like to, directly address that, because this person, he is Rohit Agarwal. He's at Ratan Ispat Private Limited at Durgapur, which is close to where I'm from. He's saying, what is the power consumed in kWh per ton for each metric ton of mild steel billet produced at your facility? I don't know if you want to say answer to that. And secondly, please share your perspective on the viability of Midrex DRI EAF route in geographies like that in countries like India. So two very well. I guess you could go with the second question.
No, I think this is a little bit more of like specific question, too technical question.
Yeah.
I would rather to skip it, I would say.
Okay. All right then. Then there is another question coming from a person called Vikas from Al Nasir. Is MS Steel having any plan to diversify into special bar quality steel or alloy steel in long products other than flat products in your diversification?
For the time being, just straightforward. No, we are going for the flat. We are embracing and improving our existing products, rebar and wire rod. So from the wire rod point of view, we are producing low, medium, and even some of high high grades, high carbon, I would say high carbon wire rod. So it depends on the market if there is anything that we can embrace and change in the qualities to really cope with the market needs that we do.
Okay, I think those are the only audience questions for now. Yeah, and oh no, sorry, there are two new messages. Oh yeah, sorry. Well, I think the last, let's just end with this question. Everyone is saying a lot of things about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and how different regions are reacting to it. The US steelmakers always tend to point out that it's more than 70% EAF production, therefore they are much cleaner and greener than their peers in other places. And you brought up the point of hydrogen used for steel production in the Gulf region. I would like to ask you this question specifically for the Gulf region. How important is it to focus on sustainability
I can tell you
in your
yeah, sure. I can tell you how it's important for me, for my company, for myself, for my family, for my kids. This is I think this is something very important. We are all living in the world where we're not going to live here only, but it's for our children, it's for our families. So we need to really do something about it, and as much as we can to reduce the CO2 emissions. I think it's from the humanity point of view, it's our obligation. Yeah. So I can tell you about Emert Steel and what we are doing. I mentioned the CO2 capturing project that we have done with ADNOC. I think it's fantastic, and we see the numbers are increasing now, where we capture the CO2 and subsequently subsequent it in the oil fields, and this is a fantastic, and we are very proud of this project. Another thing that we are doing, we are actually we're part of the Step Up program with the World Steel Association, which really target to reduce overall, to benchmark and reduce the CO2 emissions of the whole the companies that already involved on that. Another thing comes to my mind is that, as I said, in our new project, we are introducing the steel making plant facility. That's of course that will also reduce our CO2 emission. It's and the journey is there. We need to really continue, and we need to really always try to really do better things for our environment.
Thank you. And there was one very interesting point you made in the presentation. You said how the steel industry production hubs tend to change, every few, maybe in a decade or two. And you mentioned about you think it can change again. And you mentioned the US with its, all that extra EAF capacity coming on. Apart from the US, where else do you think the new production hub for steel making can go?
Well, America is a big market, I think, because of what we said. I think the big markets, another big market would be, of course, India is a very potential. And again, here in the region, the shift would be away from the construction products for more of engineering and mechanical, more of the engineering and the flat products. I think this is the way to go.
Okay. I think, yeah, that's all the questions I have, Saeed. Thank you so much. If you have any final thoughts before we sign off, otherwise.
I think one thing that I just wanted to add, I think I forgot to really mention it. Also from the construction point of view, don't get me wrong that there'll be, as I said, like the construction will be always there, but also a huge demand I think would come from the Arab region overall after inshallah after the stability of this geopolitical issues like in Iraq and in Syria and those places also. I think the demand will be coming from this side also.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lot of construction.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And now we'll be back to Alex. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation and Q&A